Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Nuance Needed podcast. I'm Amanda White.
And this is Sam.
Today, I'm really excited because we are going to talk about catharsis. Mm-hmm. And specifically, we're going to get into sort of the myth and the understanding that, like, where the idea of, like, screaming it out and punching it out, and which is what catharsis is, and how that came about as, like, modality and something that we think is really good for us, and what some of the research says. So what is cool is I've known about this for a little bit. Like, specifically, I was researching anger, I think, a couple years ago, and I came across research about, like, anger management. And the big thing with anger management is they tell people, right, if you practice aggression when you're angry, it makes you more aggressive. Mm-hmm. And a big part of anger management is actually, like, doing the opposite. But I didn't totally make the distinction between catharsis and doing other things and aggression. But Sam, your face went, oh, when I said that. What is your understanding of anger management or catharsis or anything I'm like saying so far?
I am worried because I tell a lot of people to let themselves be angry. So I'm sitting here feeling like, have I been the least helpful therapist that's ever lived? Okay, let me start here. I think my professional exposure to anger more often than not tended to be in the realm of de-escalation.
Yeah.
That was more of the training that I got, like how to deal with someone who is visibly, actively upset, bordering on aggressive, or perhaps has, like, become aggressive. And that training came from because I worked at a residential treatment center. I worked inpatient psych. I worked in the ER. So we were dealing with people that were, like, on a knife's edge at any given moment. So all of my training has more been how I stay calm through anger. And then in terms of, like, therapeutic training, it was more in the realm of, like, helping people actually allow themselves to tap into anger. Mm-hmm. Because I think anger is an emotion that actually, I would say most people are actually quite scared of.
Yeah, women especially, for sure.
Women have a hard time even allowing themselves to, like, access that. So if I think in the years that I've been doing, like, one-on-one work, I feel like I more invite them to, like, talk about what they're angry about. Mm-hmm. And give it permission and, like, remind them that, like, no, like, you're angry at that because that's something that would make somebody angry. So I think it's been more that, but I also am a big proponent of, like, scream into a pillow, punch a pillow, like, yell, let it out. So maybe I've hurt everybody I've ever worked with.
Well, I want to make a really clear distinction that there is, in this research, there's a really big difference between feeling anger and aggression.
Yeah. That's
right? You can tap into anger and feel angry
without being aggressive.
Yeah, and not be aggressive. And that is, this is the Nuance Needed podcast. So there's nuance to all of this research. And that's actually what we're going to kind of get into today. But yes, there is the research about physical catharsis and, like, punching a pillow, screaming, doing stuff like that is really interesting. And what made me really think about this is, do you remember during the pandemic when there was a group of moms in Boston that used to stand outside in a football field and scream together?
No. I don't think I heard about this.
Yes, in 2020. And a licensed therapist organized it. So they would, like, stand together, like, socially distanced. It was, like, in January. So it was, like, cold outside in Boston. And they would scream. It was, like, moms specifically. And it was actually a big deal. Like, a bunch of different news organizations picked it up to the point that the New York Times created an actual primal scream hotline, where you could like, parents could call this hotline and scream for 1 full minute.
That's the most New York Times thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yes. And I mean, I'm sure you've heard of rage rooms.
Oh, yeah. I tell people,
right?
rage rooms.
it's really interesting. We're going to get into the research on it. But yeah, rage rooms have become a thing that have like, what is
kind of exploded a little bit.
It's really exploded. It's like up. There's like 700 plus now. Specifically, I feel like they kind of took off a little bit during the pandemic. I remember being pregnant and being so angry that I really wanted to go to a rage room. I didn't because I was like, I feel like I might hurt myself.
Probably shouldn't be swinging a baseball bat when you're like 8 months pregnant. That might be bad. That takes a lot of core work.
It's also like really expensive. It's like $50 for like an hour, and then you can like you can upcharge. They like will upcharge you to like break more expensive things, like a TV. People really want to break TVs and stuff like that. So this is what's really fascinating, though, is all of this research comes from this theory that was created by this therapist, Arthur Janov. He created a type of therapy in the 1960s called primal therapy that was basically based on this idea that screaming and catharsis cured you. And I mean, literally, this is like a wild story of how it came about is a patient told him about a performance where an actor screamed "mommy" and "daddy" at the audience. So the therapist asked a patient to try it. The man fell on the floor, wiggled around for 30 minutes, and then said he could feel. Like he was able to tap into his emotions. So the therapist was like, oh my God, this is a cure for neurosis, right? This was in the 1960s. He published a book called Primal Scream. It sold over 1 million copies. And he claimed that it could cure depression, anxiety, asthma, even cancer, right? Which is ridiculous. And that really like held in our culture. Sam, I wanted you to read 2 of the quotes from him.
His first quote is, "I believe that the only way to eliminate neuroses is with overthrow by force and violence." Okay. And the second is, "Feelings are their own validation. We can quote and cite all day long, but the truth ultimately lies in the experience of human beings. Their feelings explain so much that statistical evidence is irrelevant." Okay.
So not a surprise that there have not been, he kind of eschewed research, was not into running research on this, and really did it based on vibes. And he kind of became a celebrity. Like John Lennon was one of his clients, like Yoko Ono.
So he was a little bit like, he was kind of like a Brene Brown.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brene Brown does research. How I'm picturing it is like if you think about the wellness, like it was before Tony Robbins. I think in the 80s there was something called like Est that came out that was like super self-helpy, right? Like, win friends, win influence,
the Dale Carnegie book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or even, do you remember being in therapy, and maybe it was because I had a weirdo woo-woo professor, but he used to make us watch these like really old videos of like Gestalt therapy or psychodrama.
Yeah.
Right? And they were just like, look at these people changing.
Yeah. To give this guy like an ounce of credit, I do find that fascinating that was coming. If you look at it from like a historical perspective, I do find that fascinating that would take place in the 60s because, I mean, people had been repressed for forever up to that point. But there was a very, very unique type of repression that occurred in the 50s because everybody just wanted everything to be so normal post-World War II, which is why the 50s felt so rigid and normie, and we're not going to talk about anything because we don't want to acknowledge how bad it is, and we have a nice little house now with 2 kids, so things should be fine. But then behind the scenes, everybody was addicted to alcohol and cigarettes and barbiturates and pills and everything else. So then in the 60s, when the social fabric started to become more upset because of the civil rights movement in Vietnam and anti-government protests and all of that, there was this explosion of the counterculture. So I find it, like, timeline-wise in the timeline of history, like, it makes sense that he would be like, oh yeah, we just have to scream. Thinking of back then, that would feel so revolutionary to be able to allow yourself to just like lose your mind into the universe for the first time in your entire life. So that I do give him like a modicum of credit.
That's really good perspective that I didn't think about at all.
Yeah. So I think that makes total sense to me, that would be one of like the first big like self-help movements that kind of has that like somatic seasoning to it, right? Yep. It's about being in your body and, you know, Woodstock and love and all of that.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. But this is the study that I know of. It's like a famous like punching bag study that sort of debunked and really changed the way we approached anger management.
Okay, so psychologist Brad Bushman ran a study at Iowa State University. Participants were made angry by receiving insulting feedback on an essay they'd written, then split into 3 groups. Group 1 hit a punching bag while thinking about the person who insulted them. Group 2 hit the same punching bag but thought about getting physically fit. Group 3 did nothing, they just sat quietly. The researchers measured both how angry people felt afterward and how aggressively they behaved toward the person who had insulted them. The group that hit the bag while thinking about the person who angered them were the most aggressive afterward. The group that sat and did nothing was calmer than either group that hit the bag. The conclusion, acting out anger physically while focused on the source of that anger doesn't discharge anything. It rehearses and reinforces anger.
Tell me what your thoughts are on that. Because that's like this study is sort of known as like rehearsal is this idea of you're like training your body to crave this like rehearsal of anger when you let it out in a specific aggressive way.
It's really fascinating. Also, I forgot to add, this was done in 2002. So fairly recent. I think what it brought up for me is like in therapy training, there's such like a big focus on feeling things. And obviously, so that sounds like a very dumb thing to say when I'm like, so when you train to be a therapist, they tell you to like feel feelings. But I think what's really interesting to me is I think sometimes we in this profession really overcomplicate things. And I think as I was reading that, that's what I was thinking of, like reflecting on the work I do with my clients. And I think sometimes our anxieties so desperately want solutions to things or just to like feel better that we're like, well, it has to be more complicated than this because the thing that made me feel this way is in fact a very complicated situation. But at the end of the day, the feeling itself is actually not the complicated piece, if that makes sense. So to think that the group that just sat there and allowed themselves to experience it and sort through it and just think about it, they were able to find meaning from it, right? Like they rode through the wave of the emotion rather than fighting against it, which is what like the punching, they were fighting against the actual release of it because they just kept perseverating on the thing that was making them angry.
Totally. And this is the piece that I think is phenomenal in explaining sort of why, because I'm sure people are feeling like, but I feel better, right? Like the people who are like, I feel better when I punch a pillow. I feel better when I scream, right? You can't tell me that I don't feel better. I do, which I relate to actually.
Yeah, same.
And it's why I've sort of like not dug into this research super hard before now because it feels wrong, sort of. But this is what I learned that is the key that totally transformed how I understand it. When you are doing something like this, you are essentially causing your heart rate to increase. You're creating like a lot of endorphins to flood through your body. So what you're actually creating is like an endorphin flood crash cycle. Let's say you're feeling, I don't know, let's say 1 to 10. Let's say you're feeling like a 5 right now in terms of like how bad you feel. If you start punching something or like screaming, you're going to probably feel worse a little bit, right? You're going to go up in this anger, in this screaming, and you feel like you're tapping into it. You feel like, I'm getting it out. This is how I felt underneath. So let's say you go up to an 8. Then you stop doing it. What happens when you stop? Your endorphins are going to go down. You're going to regulate a little bit. And you're going to feel way better. But I'm making all these numbers up. Let's say you go from an 8 down to a 5, you feel better. But do you feel better than the original 5 you were before? Right? Or is it just the crash that you created by revving yourself up and then experiencing the crash that gave you this like false sense of feeling better?
It's like the Overton window for your feelings.
Yes.
Like you're expanding your capacity for discomfort, but not in a way that's like actually processing. Well, like you're practicing like being able to like hold more anger rather than just experience anger.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And that's why, especially when it comes to doing something physically aggressive, right? We talk a lot on this podcast about, right, like the things you do really impact your mood. We know our brains can change, and the habits that we do can literally change our responses to things. So if someone practices often when they feel angry that they need to scream, they will start craving it, not even necessarily because it feels better, but because it is a habit that your brain gets used to. So that's why it's so important in anger management and stuff. If you don't want to, you can scream if you want, right? Like it's not really hurting anybody, so it doesn't really matter. But when it comes to something like physical aggression, especially someone who has the, capacity to hurt someone, that's where it really matters. And we don't want to train someone to be aggressive. And I think those people who are trying to change, we don't want to reinforce that habit, which is very obvious as I'm saying this, even though it seems counterintuitive.
Yeah. What's coming up for me is really what we're telling people is don't sit with it. Like we're telling people to listen to it almost. And I'm cautious with that because I don't want it to sound like I'm getting too into like the therapy weeds. Yet to sit with it is to practice feeling an emotion and literally doing nothing about it. But then if we are constantly telling people when we're angry, well, that's the emotion that you have to do something about it. Like it's exactly as you said, like we're training them that's the only way that anger can expel itself. But then it's also exactly as you said of like now we've just increased their capacity to feel and experience anger. And it becomes, as you like expand a capacity, you also develop a distress tolerance to it. And so it can require like more and more screaming.
Yes.
To feel like you worked, like you let it out.
Yes. And I think, and I want to be really clear, we're not saying like don't do coping skills and the next thing you're going to read, Sam, I think is going to help kind of seal this all together. Like the whole point of this is I think what I'm trying to debunk is this idea that screaming is like healing you in some way. Like if you need to scream to cope, do whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
But I think where it gets off track is when we're like, because there are literal, as I was doing research into this, there are like forest rage retreats where people like go into the forest and scream. Or I think about Mel Robbins. Our friend Mel Robbins is, of course, on tour and trying to position herself as the next Tony Robbins. And a lot of these like really intense like self-help seminars and retreats create this like false sense of healing by having people scream. And they're like, look at all this work that someone did because they screamed. And that's really what I'm trying to debunk is like, if you want to do that as a coping skill and it makes you feel better, go do you. Like there's nothing in you. You know what I mean? Like I feel like we think sometimes that like we just have to cut ourselves open enough and dig out, especially with like the whole idea of like your hips, right, contain trauma. And if you just sit, and I like really relate to this because I really fell prey to a lot of this when I was trying to get into recovery. And when I was deep in yoga, I truly thought like doing just some of this without any, processing or reorienting, right, or grounding was just, it's healing to sit in half pigeon for a long time and cry. And like, sure, can that do something where it like relaxes you, your mind wanders, so you hear, you think about things differently, sure, but there's not something trapped in you that you just have to cut out like a splinter.
No, this is like quite fascinating for me on a personal level, especially when you brought up the hips thing, because there was like a long time. This was like recently. This was like a year ago. I would notice that when I would go home to my parents, like my hips would get super tight and I would have a lot of pain. And I immediately was like, oh my God, it's because of my trauma with my brother. And like, I would have to stretch and all that. And all of a sudden it hit me that I was like, no, it's a shitty mattress.
You were traveling on a plane.
I was traveling on a plane. I was tight. And then I went and slept on a shitty mattress. And I said to my mom, I was like, Mom, I need a new mattress. And she was like, okay. And then she got a new mattress and it was fine. Mm-hmm. But I had this moment where I was like, oh, my body is like registering that I feel traumatized around my brother. And it was like, no, I'm a side sleeper and my hips were suffering.
And I'm trying to walk this line because like I don't want anyone to feel like we're saying somatic therapy is wrong or like deeper healing work or anything. But what I can say that's really different about somatic therapy, EMDR, all of these things is like the integration is built in. Number one, the whole point is like the reprocessing of it and like cognitively looking at things differently. And the second part is you're working within your window of tolerance versus a lot of these things are pushing you outside of your window of tolerance to cause this crash that we were talking about. And I relate to it also with like, I was obsessed with stretching up until very recently and it was actively harming my body. And I actively was like, I'm so tight. I need to stretch more. Never would I have thought that like overstretching was causing my body to be sore because it was searching for stability. Like,
yeah, I think I feel frustrated with myself in this because it's kind of like hearing it. There's a part of me that's like, well, duh. Like with all of my like professional experience and background, I'm like, okay, you big dumb. Like you've been telling people like, go to a rage room, you know? But also to back up what you said about like, we are not sitting here discounting any therapeutic modality, right? But I think the difference is like a therapeutic modality well delivered asks you to simply sit in something. Mm-hmm. It doesn't ask you to fix anything. It asks you to accept it. Right? Now, again, going back to what you said, Amanda, this is not about saying like, well, coping skills are useless or like solutions don't matter or, you know, like we shouldn't take action, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking at a very basic level, the experience of emotion. Mm-hmm. Like the biological experience of it. We find a million ways to like outrun that or diminish it or minimize it, whatever. And I think good therapy asks you to just sit there. And I think it's the same thing with anger. Like, can you just sit and allow your anger to come to the surface and do nothing about it? And just let it be there and acknowledge like, I am angry right now. And I actually don't have to do anything about it. Because what I'm wondering too, if we're talking about like the scream, if we use the scream example.
Yeah.
Are we angry or are we just overstimulated? Mm-hmm. Like is the scream more of like a stim than it is like an actual, oh, this is me processing my anger.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, gather around because Mother's Day is coming up and I have the plan for how you are going to spoil your mom, a mom that is important to you, a mom of your friend, basically any mom that you would like. I'm going to give you the plan, okay? You are going to go to Cozy Earth and you are going to get her literally anything. But ideally, the combo that I've come up with for my mom is we are going to do robes, slippers, sheets, and a blanket, okay? I am going to wrap my mom in the softest, coziest pajamas and sheets and robes and slippers that I have ever personally tried in my life. I just think the reason I'm putting this like package together like this is because I think it is so special for the women in our life who work so hard and give so much and rarely think of themselves, and they need to be thinking of themselves more, to give them this gift, whatever you end up getting them, right? To let them know that they need a moment to themselves. And they need a moment to rest and chill, and to do that in some of the most comfortable sheets, pajamas, blankets, robes, and slippers I have literally ever used in my life. So with that said, I also want to let you know, you get a 100-night sleep trial with any of the products. So you can try it for 100 nights and decide at any point in there that you don't like it and send it back. But also, if you do decide you like it, these products are covered with a 10-year warranty. You get 10 years of use out of these products. Your mom will thank you for this cost-saving measure gift. So with all that said, I have a special gift for you. If you use code NUANCE at checkout, you get 20% off. That's code NUANCE, NUANCE, because home starts with mom. Can't wait to hear what you guys think.
There was a new study that was done that was actually inspired by women screaming during the pandemic.
Okay.
That I want you to read.
Okay. In 2024, researchers Sophie Kiervik and Brad Bushman published a meta-analysis in Clinical Psychology Review analyzing 154 studies involving over 10,000 participants across different genders, races, ages, and cultures. They looked at 2 categories of anger management: activities that increase physiological arousal, i.e. hitting a bag, jogging, cycling, swimming, and activities that decrease arousal, i.e. deep breathing, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, progressive muscle relaxation. Arousal decreasing activities significantly reduced anger and aggression across every population they tested. Arousal increasing activities, including jogging, were ineffective for managing anger. Some made it worse. Bushman states, despite what popular wisdom may suggest, even going for a run is not an effective strategy because it increases arousal levels and ends up being counterproductive. This study was inspired in part by the rise of rage rooms.
So this is what's really fascinating, because this is a very comprehensive study, obviously. And what I think is fascinating and where the nuance is that if we are only talking about immediately after, that is true. But one thing they didn't measure was how do you feel like an hour later? And I think that's where some of the nuances for me, like if you are trying to feel less rageful, if you are trying to feel, and specifically it's talking about anger, which is like an energizing emotion, right? If we're talking about anything that is getting your heart rate up and leaning into it, it is going to create that endorphin crash cycle that we just talked about. And it is a normal thing in trauma therapy. We talk about do sort of the opposite thing. If your energy is low, if you're feeling really sluggish, do some jumping jacks to like regulate yourself. If you're really activated, do some deep breathing, do some things to calm yourself down.
What I hear you're describing in relation to that actually has nothing to do with emotion. That is regulation.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
That is stress regulation. I think that is managing your nervous system in real time. That is doing something that's like a mindfulness activity to me, like allowing yourself to kind of feel like what happens in your body. And that's when I talk to my clients about breathing, that's exactly what I talk about. I break it down as like because I think, to circle back to like the online world real quick, we've done a really bad job of explaining why we're telling people to breathe. And the thing that I've been reminding people lately is I'm asking you to breathe because slowing down your breath reminds your nervous system that you don't have to get into an immediate sprint to run from a dinosaur. All of the symptoms of anxiety and stress and overwhelm and nervous system activation are designed for you to have some type of immediate life-saving response, whether that's punching someone in the face or running away, or like immediately collapsing to the ground in a ball. So when you start to take long, deep breaths and you feel how that breath sits in your body and you feel the release of your muscles when you exhale, that is reminding your brain that it can get out of the nervous system and into your frontal lobe, where you can actually make decisions. And so when I hear you talking about the bouncing or the shaking or the jumping or doing something like a run, I'm hearing those are coping skills for when you feel flooded. Those are coping skills for when you are experiencing overwhelm. When we are talking about something like anger, which is a very base emotion that every single human being is hardwired to experience, those types of activities are not sufficient enough to allow you to experience that. That is something that just simply needs to be allowed to ride out in your body. Which I saw a study that said the average experience of a feeling is about 90 seconds. So if you feel something come up, if you can allow yourself to just be there for about a minute, minute and a half, You'll probably come out on the other side of it, and there's nothing you have to do about it. I think that's the distinction, the layman's terms distinction I want to make here.
Totally.
Which is why I find this so brilliant.
Well, yes. And then I think this is really interesting. The whole point is like catharsis can be good as long as you're not staying there and you're integrating it. And this is actually what like Peter Levine literally said. He founded the Somatic Experiencing like Institute and everything. He warns against therapies that provoke intense emotional release just for the release's sake. Right? Which is what just a primal scream. It's going into the forest, being at a Tony Robbins thing. That is just like for the release of it versus it's better. And EMDR focuses on this too. Like do small, manageable things that slowly widen your window of tolerance instead of trying to jack up, like go so far outside your window of tolerance thinking that it will expand it. Because a lot of times when you jerk up and down like that, you actually cause your window to shrink over time. And that's how you can actually like, I don't know if I want like re-traumatize yourself if you have a lot of trauma.
Yeah. Well, because you're not actually dealing with it.
Yeah, you're not integrating anything.
You're not integrating anything.
You're just focusing on what it looks like sort of on the outside.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I would, if people are like, oh, no, I can't cry. No. Crying is regulating.
Yeah. Right.
Like, that's why you actually do feel better after you cry more often than not, even though you're swollen and snotty and whatever. Internally, you will feel better because that was regulation.
Well, a lot of times your tears when you cry, they've done studies and they've looked at like tears from cutting an onion versus tears from when someone's upset. And a lot of times there are hormones in the tears because it's a way that your body's releasing hormones, literally.
Yeah. That's why it's like, it's actually bad to like choke back a cry.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's like, it's something that's wanting to be expressed. I think what I'm hearing here as the thesis is that it's not that these things like screaming or hitting something with a baseball bat are necessarily bad or wrong or should never be done or never have a place. It's don't ascribe the responsibility of healing to those things. To like do the work is going to be, it's going to take more time than just going into a room and like beating the shit out of something.
Well, it's sort of like the difference between, you can journal or, you can journal something out or you can like vent to a friend. But that's why venting in therapy is different because it's not about like the release is like step one, but it's not actually the work of therapy. It's not where the real change happens.
I made a post a little bit ago that said basically what it talked about was, people get really tripped up that they're not feeling better in like 3 to 4 sessions with a therapist. My response to that is, well, if all it took was 3 to 4 hours, the venting sessions you had with your friends would have been sufficient by now. And to allow the complexity of your life experience and the ways that it's impacted you to exist is something that takes time. And there's been a myth on social media that I've seen going around that makes me like really upset. Well, actually, myth is the wrong word. I would say judgment of people saying that therapists are like purposely keeping people in therapy for long periods of time in order to ensure they get paid.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. Therapy is expensive. It is time consuming. We can have discussions all day long around access to resources and should therapy be an innate human right that you go to it as you need it and whatever, right? Like there could probably be an entire podcast that exists on that concept alone. But if we're talking about the concept of integrating and the concept of like expanding your capacity and recovering from something, not just healing, but recovering from something that you experienced, that takes time. Because a lot of times you do not understand the impact of something, even though you know that it impacted you, right? Like the example that I give is like my deconstruction from the Mormon church. that is a lifetime experience for me now.
The amount of years that you were in it, it's going to take a lot of time to unpack.
Yes, it is going to take time, and it is going to take sitting on it and chewing on it. And I took about a year-long break from therapy at one point, and now I'm back in it and exploring things in a whole new light that I'm, as I've been through a lot of change in the last 2 years and recognizing a lot of that and a lot of those patterns. Like, I just find it so unfair that everybody is putting pressure on everybody that something is supposed to be wrapped up with a bow in a couple months. And that if it takes longer than that, like, you are innately broken or there's something inherently wrong with you. And it's exactly as you said. Like, if every once in a while you feel like you just need this moment where you just scream because you're frustrated or you're upset or you're overwhelmed or you're feeling flooded, like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Do it. But that is not something that is just going to innately invite healing on its own. And I'm hearing that that's like the thesis of this.
100%. Yeah, I mean, that is sort of, there's literally a word for it that Peter Levine came up with. It is the difference between aberrative versus integrative catharsis. Like, the release isn't the point, right?
Yeah, right.
That's what the research says doesn't work. The integration part is when the emotional expression happens inside a container. You can reflect, you feel safe, you can create meaning, you can process it, you can make sense of it, you can re-understand yourself. That's what happens. Like, that's how change happens. Even if you don't do that with a therapist. Sometimes like that process can happen outside of therapy. But like the meaning making, the reorganization, the reprocessing is what changes your life. And I think more and more also what I was thinking, Sam, as you said that is like, and it sucks, but the older I get, the more I'm like, to change takes time because you have to have enough experience to like do things over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, if you, like, the biggest thing that helped me heal my people pleasing, understanding it was great, reading books, but it was doing different things. It was like exposing myself to people who didn't like me and showing up anyway, and then having the actual reference point that I didn't die. And no book could teach me that better than the lived experience of it. And I mean, and I think that's a universal thing in terms of if you are getting divorced and you feel like the experience of getting divorced and being alone will kill you. If you want to switch jobs, if you're, if you're going to have, if you've been avoiding conversations. And I think it's what we talk about a lot on the podcast. Like, therapy is the support and the container to do that. But what really changes your life is the referential experience of doing different things, which fucking sucks.
It does.
I wish it were easier. But that takes time because you can't, it takes time because you actually have to do those things over a period of time for your brain to change.
Yeah, you need a whole new slate of evidence to rely on in your head to prove that these are safe things to do. And like rebuild a sense of trust with yourself. Piggybacking off of that, something that I've been noticing a lot in my work with people is, and even with myself, is this realization that, oh, this feels hard because it's actually hard. Like, this is a hard situation to go through, whatever that thing is. And I think we've developed this belief, and I think therapy speak is to blame. Part of this, is that we all think that if something is hard, challenging, overwhelming, difficult for us, that is an innate flaw of ourselves. That if there was something we did differently, if there was some better, more efficient habit stacking way of approaching this, it wouldn't feel this hard. And I just have started to realize, like, a hypothesis in my own life is that is just so categorically unfair. because there are just a lot of things that you go through that are just hard and complicated, and they would be that way no matter how you approached it, no matter how many resources you threw at it, no matter how many times you tried it. There are just things that are hard. And to make peace with that and practice like meeting yourself where you're at and doing what you're able to, and like to take time practicing identifying what that barometer looks like from day to day. I think that is how you actually make life feel better. Because I think that there's this obsession that we have with being better. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to be better, that there's going to be this magical place that you get to where nothing impacts you, and this is fine, and it feels good, and I'm happy and I'm at peace. And if you understand the human condition, it is fluid. Mm-hmm. Even when things in life feel categorically stable for you, you have bad days, you have difficult weeks, you have curveballs, you have moments where you're so stupid, deliriously happy, and it doesn't make sense why, but you're having a good day, you're having a good time with your friends, your family, your spouse, your kids. Like, to stop hyper fixating on like, how do I feel better? And instead say like, well, how does today feel manageable for me? And if like a primal yell is part of that, if jumping up and down and feeling your joints is part of that, if talking to somebody is part of that, like, that's great. Mm-hmm. But those are just coping skills.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's like thinking of it as like meeting your needs, I think is helpful, right? Just like you're hungry, you're thirsty, you need to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Like thinking about it as there are things you have to do every day to just like take care of your nervous system and process life, because you get hungry, you need food, you need, like, we all need these things. And I think that sometimes is missing, that like we all have needs, and we have mental health needs too. Even if you have great mental health, you have mental health needs. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Let us know what you think of these deep dive episodes. We're going to incorporate them more, but they've been really fun to do, and we feel like
it helps us.
They're not too nerdy for you.
Yeah. It helps us. That's why we're doing it. So, as per usual, anything you can do to rate, review, share, subscribe, get the word out. You guys have been leaving some lovely comments and reviews for us, and we love that, because we are people pleasers deep down at our core. And so anything that you can do to tell us that you're actually liking this and that you're enjoying this, it makes us feel good inside.
It does.
So, because validation matters. Comment, rate, review, share, subscribe. You guys are the best.
Join us on Substack. We have some really great, at this point, we have like over 20 bonus episodes on Substack, especially if you like more of the pop culture stuff we do, that lives there. We have deep dives in terms of like really long guides to help you with different things. So nuanceneeded.substack.com. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.